All right. Hope you guys had a good weekend. We're back at it, world history. And we're still in China. So, when we talked about China, we've talked about some dynasties, we've talked about some philosophies, and now we got to talk about some religion. Okay, so when you talk about China, you talk about religion. The majority of the Chinese are Buddhists. So, let's talk a little bit about Buddha. Okay, there's a picture of Buddha. There's a whole bunch of different pictures of Buddha, but I prefer the chunky Buddha, so that's the one I picked for the picture. Uh, Buddha was a prince when he was born by the name of Siddhartha, um, and he lived in India. His mom and dad were king and queen. When he was a small child, they took him to see a prophet, and the prophet said that he was going to be a saint um, as long as he gave up all of his worldly possessions um, and denounced the throne. So um, his mom and dad kept him in the palace for 29 years. Um, Gave him all the finer things. He got married, had a kid, and his mom and dad's plan was to get him accustomed to living in such a lifestyle that he'd never want to leave. Therefore, he would become the new king and never want to leave the palace. So one day he went out for a drive on his chariot, and he came across a old man, and the guy who was driving the chariot says, "Yeah, everybody gets older and everybody gets weaker as they age." The next person he came across was a sick man um, who was weak and struggling with sickness. And then he saw a dead man, a funeral procession for a dead man. They were carrying him through the streets to take him to his final resting spot. Uh, After he saw these three things, he saw a sage, and the driver of the chariot explained to this Buddha, well, Siddhartha at the time, um, that these men give up all their possessions to seek inner peace. So he went back to the palace, and after a while of thinking about it, in the middle of the night, he left the palace, his wife and his son, and set out to find an understanding for some of these things that he saw. See if he could find a deeper meaning. Um, he came across a tree and meditated, and he found that meditation was the way of reaching enlightenment. So the other thing about Buddha is, as he was meditating, he, in his mind, came up with four noble truths. Um, and this is something that you have to get through these noble truths to seek enlightenment. So life is filled with suffering and sorrow. That was his first truth. The cause of this suffering and sorrow is people's desire for temporary pleasure. So, whatever that thing is, money, fame, love, whatever that temporary pleasure that you're trying to seek, that is typically the cause of your sorrow. If you would like to end your suffering and end your sorrow, you must end your desire for these things. So, if you have no wants, you will have no suffering and you will have no sorrow. And to do this, you had to do something that was called following the Eightfold Path. Um, and there's a middle path between desire and self denial. So here's the Eightfold Path. If you follow the Eightfold Path, you could reach nirvana, which nirvana is the release of selfishness and pain. So you had to have the right views, the right thoughts, the right speech, the right action, the right livelihood, so that's job, right efforts, right mindfulness, and right meditation. Okay, so those were the Eightfold Path. The other thing with Buddhism is karma. So what goes around comes around. If you're a good person, if you're a kind person, kindness will be returned in like. If you're an evil person or a mean person, then evil or meanness will be also returned in like. So the other thing that Buddhists believe in are reincarnation. So you come back as And depending on the way you lived your life, so if you lived your life as a just and kind being, then you'll come back as a just and kind reincarnation. If you were a mean person or an evil person, then you come back as something that's less than great. So watch a quick video on Buddha.
Science is a blast with Generation Genius, a new teaching resource of science videos and lessons for grades 8 to 8. It inspires students and saves teachers.
Gautam Buddha. Gautam Buddha was born to the king and queen of Kapilavastu as Prince Siddharth around 566 BC. Soon after his birth, an astrologer predicted that he was destined to live his life as a saint by abdicating the throne and giving up all worldly pleasures. His parents Shuddhodana and Maya Devi were shattered by the news and decided to prevent this from happening by keeping a close watch on him and sheltering him from the outside world. His parents hoped that he would get used to the luxuries of the palace and therefore never give it up. At age 16, he was married to Yashodhara, the beautiful daughter of a nobleman. Siddharth's curiosity grew with age, and one day he asked his charioteer to take him on a tour of the city. The first person they came across was an old man who seemed weak and frail. The charioteer explained that along with age comes weakness and failing health. He then came across a sick man who was in great pain, and finally, a procession carrying a dead body to the cremation ground. He was told that everyone would die one day and leave this world. At the end of the tour, he chanced upon a sage who appeared calm and serene. And after inquiring, Siddharth was told that such men give up their worldly possessions in search of inner peace. Siddharth was deeply troubled by his first experience of the outside world. He decided that to answer all his questions about life and death, he would have to leave the palace and give up his palatial life. At the age of 29, Siddharth left the palace one night while his wife and son were still sleeping. After trying different ways to find the path of truth, he finally reached the city of Bodh Gaya and started meditating under a large fig tree. After 49 days of meditation, at the age of 35, Siddharth attained enlightenment. From that day on, he was known as Buddha, or the Awakened One, after the Bodhi tree under which he meditated. Gautam Buddha shared his knowledge with 5 sannyasis who meditated with him and also traveled across the country teaching the key principles of Buddhism known as the Noble Truth. They are: the world is full of suffering and misery. Desire is the cause for all suffering and misery. Suffering and misery can be abolished by removing desire. Desire can be overcome by following the Eightfold Path. This includes right views, right thoughts, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right efforts, right mindfulness, and right meditation. Several Buddhist monuments stand all over India to this day, such as the world-renowned Ajanta and Ellora caves, the Kanheri and Karla caves, as well as universities at Sanchi and Amravati. Gautam Buddha passed away in 483 BC. Though he lived centuries ago, his birthday is still remembered as Buddha Jayanti in India. The Bodhi tree is still worshipped as a symbol of enlightenment even today.
All right, so you'll see just a quick pie chart of different types of Buddhism. And this Vajrayana, the top 6% there, that's the Tibetan Buddhists. And then you have the other two. The yellow one there, you can see it requires you to become a monk if you want to become that type of Buddhist. And then the other type of Buddhist, the most popular type of Buddhism, is that you just have to have compassion and seek some personal enlightenment through meditation. So the last thing we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about Tibet. You've probably heard different celebrities talking about free Tibet and this Tibet, that Tibet. So you should learn a little bit about it. So for centuries, Tibet was its own country. It was fought over. It's right in the foothills of the Himalaya mountains. There's plateaus there, and it was a place that was occupied by a lot of different people. But for years and years and years and years and years, it was its own country. Tibet was the home of the Dalai Lama. Lamaism is a version of Buddhism. It's a sect of Buddhism. And the Dalai Lama is the leader of this sect. I think this one is the 14th Dalai Lama. And every time the Lama dies, he's reincarnated as another person. This particular Lama was born on a dirt floor in a barn. He had like 15 brothers and sisters. Only 7 of them made it into adulthood. The rest of them passed away in infancy. So he was very poor. His family was very poor, and he arose to be the Dalai Lama. So China and Japan fought in World War II, and after World War II, there was a guy by the name of Mao Zedong that took over China, and Chinese became communist. After Chinese became communist, they went into Tibet and occupied Tibet. The Dalai Lama, at the time, somebody tipped him off that China was coming, so he fled China and went to India, where he's been living ever since. And Tibet is currently trying to free themselves from Chinese rule. So, and that's why you'll see, like, I can remember a few years ago, like George Clooney was big on free Tibet, and Lady Gaga went and met the Dalai Lama, and every now and then the Dalai Lama comes to the United States and has a press tour, and then it kind of reinvigorates the conversation, and so that's kind of where everything is with the Dalai Lama in Tibet. So we're going to watch a real quick video on the Dalai Lama. This will be the last thing we do for today.
Along with in the towering Himalayas, between South Asia and China, Tibet has always been, in the eyes of the world, a legendary kingdom of peace and tranquility. Its people deeply attached to their religion and their way of life. Their creed, one of tolerance, respect for the individual, love of animals and nature, belief in the spiritual equality of all human beings. A land that is rich, not in gold or earthly wealth, but in the soul of its people, where ritual and prayer mark all aspects of daily life and labor, where evil spirits are feared as symbols of the evil in man, where benign deities are revered as incarnations of man's own capacity for love and compassion. A land with a simple economy, with a limited trade with India and China, enough to satisfy the wants of a sturdy, independent people. Near Lhasa, the capital, stands the Potala, main shrine of Lamaistic Buddhism, repository of religious scriptures and treasures, an architectural masterpiece for the Asian world. Founder of the Tibetan religion in the 6th century was the Indian teacher Padmasambhava. Revered by his people as a divine incarnation and ruler of Tibet is the Dalai Lama. Born 23 years ago, the present Dalai Lama has the loyalty of 3 million Tibetans. In addition, 8 million people in Mongolia, Manchuria, China, Turkestan, Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan are followers of Lamaism in one form or another and have close ties with the people of Tibet. Lamaism in Tibet is part of the great world of Buddhism. 500 million people throughout Asia who follow the teachings of the Gautama Buddha. 2,500 years ago, he taught a philosophy of love and compassion, which became a civilizing influence on mankind. He taught men to free themselves of unworthy passions, of greed and conquest. In 1950, Tibet was occupied by the armies of Communist China, ending a long period of Tibetan self-rule. Greedy for conquest, the Communists wanted mastery over the land and soul of Tibet. The Dalai Lama was brought to Piping, along with the Panchen Lama, who is regarded as a divine incarnation, second only to the Dalai Lama. Communist China had promised to respect Tibet's religious institutions and its right to local self-rule. In 1955, at the Bandung Conference, the pledge to Tibet seemed strengthened as Communist China's premier, Zhou Enlai, joined in the declaration of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence between nations. More specifically, Communist China had, the previous year, come to a solemn agreement with India regarding the status of Tibet. At Bandung, the nations of Asia and Africa declared that imperialism had no place in the modern world. Nations and people were to be free. The next year, in 1956, the Dalai Lama was allowed to travel to India. He was received with great respect by the leaders of India and Premier U Nu of Burma. He had come to attend the celebration of the 2500th anniversary of the birth of the founder of the Buddhist religion. For several months, he was India's honored guest, a spiritual leader of the Buddhist world, widely respected by leaders of all faiths. In allowing both the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama to take part in this memorable anniversary of the Buddhist faith, Communist China seemed intent on impressing the world with its tolerance of a religious ideal so contrary to its own doctrine of violence and materialism. But in Tibet itself, the communists were gradually imposing their will, breaking their pledge to respect local government and customs. In the Chinese provinces bordering Tibet, the communists had begun to impose the dreaded commune system, with its slave labor, breakup of families, economic hardships, repression of religious worship. Tibetan minorities in these areas revolted and warned their countrymen across the border. It seemed only a matter of time before the communists imposed the cruel system in Tibet. In March 1959, they made the threatening moves against the Dalai Lama. The rebellion exploded full force. Lhasa, under communist bombardment, the Dalai Lama fled to India. Against the communists' reign of terror, Tibetans took up arms. It was a cry for liberty. There was indignation in India and throughout Asia. To the rallying cry of "Hands off Tibet," crowds demonstrated in front of the embassies of Communist China, while government leaders and newspaper editorials spoke of Tibet as the Hungary of Asia, an example of aggression and imperialism against a defenseless people. The news of the Dalai Lama's escape and the continued resistance of the Tibetan people brought jubilation mixed with anxiety. Tibetans in New Delhi, led by Silin Longkongwa, a former Prime Minister of Tibet who fled communist rule in 1956, prayed at the Samadhi of Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of Indian independence, the great leader who became a universal symbol of liberty and brotherhood. In this hour of trial, freedom-loving people everywhere felt as one with the Tibetan people, sharing their belief in the justice of their cause. One month after fleeing his capital, eluding communist search parties in an arduous journey through Himalayan mountain passes, the Dalai Lama with his family and 90 of his closest followers reached Indian soil. Indian government officials and press representatives from around the world witnessed his arrival in Tezpur in the state of Assam. The Dalai Lama declared that his escape would not have been possible without the loyal support of his people. People of goodwill everywhere rejoiced in his safety. The Dalai Lama expressed his gratitude to the Indian government for its grant of asylum and hospitality. The Dalai Lama accused the communists of interfering in his country's religious affairs, destroying monasteries in Kham province, using Tibetans as forced labor. He cited mass protests by his people and subsequent repressions. In Tezpur, the world saw in the gentle countenance of the Dalai Lama the image of a leader whose efforts at conciliation had met with brutal contempt by communist China. In India, he was received with added respect and reverence. The Buddha's ideals of love and compassion are under attack, but people will not surrender their soul. Our thoughts go out to the people of Tibet in their continuing struggle. To them we speak with the words of a great poet. There is not a breathing of the common wind that will forget thee. Thou hast great allies. Thy friends are exaltations, agonies, and love, and man's unconquerable mind.
All right, that is everything for Monday or Tuesday, depending on when you are actually taking this class. Tomorrow on Wednesday, because Tuesday is an election day, you guys will be watching a lot of election coverage. Talk to Mr. Lovelace about it, and he will find some election coverage so you guys can be up to date on current events, not just ancient Chinese events. All right, have a good week. If you got any questions about anything, give me a holler. It was there'll be an assignment, an election assignment that goes along with this after these set of notes. So look for that on Schoology. All right, see you next week. Bye.